Chapter 12. Madness of Crowds. I fell asleep waking a few hours later. It was dark when I went upstairs into the ship's empty canteen. I sat there thinking to myself about the key events since my rebellion against the state's null hypotheses. Its dystopian society that had constrained my life, denying the possibility of accepting any alternate hypotheses of statistical being. I sat there thinking how fortunate I had been over the weeks. The probability that I should have been rendered a redundant node and sent to Arcadia was significant. Yet by some emanation of good fortune, it resulted in this free floating position, sitting here relatively free whilst feeling more confident each new liberated day upon the Aqua Prior. I considered the botched confabulation treatment which ended even before it had begun, and of other fortunate realized situations. Most probably it was Arima manipulating situations to make me bend towards his null hypothesis ideology, as he craved controlling everything by proxy, with statistical quotas of State Utopia's Economic Efficiency Act. Autarky always used the political phrase, "Through total statistical constraint of the population comes abandonment of oneself, yet comes a peace, only found within the collectivized harmony of the normalized utopian state." This phrase was edged into the convolutions of my mind, engraved since high school, which now had suddenly sprung to my forethoughts. It must have been Arima, I concluded. He had set me free, allowed me to be persecuted, yet all the while helping me to survive, so eventually I would tire and yield to his utopian state. It all makes sense now. Arima was powerful, yet perhaps mad, and I was his little indulgence, his little hobby, all to get me to yield to the stationary thinking and behavior processes expected of the statistical utopian state, ultimately submitting to his will, which ironically was biased, tainted with his non-stationary, integrated, unpredictable madness and exogenous shock whims. Even though the utopian state had invested many decades and a significant amount of financing into my education and nurtured me to eventually rise to a potential alpha-ship position. Yet according to Arima, there had been many hundreds of similar nodes to me who were allowed to rebel against the state, who inevitably would cease their rebellion, adopting the utopia state once again, but only this time with an even greater zeal and patriotism. Similar to the numerous immature, wealthy university students who rebelled against every aspect of the utopian state, whilst learning about all of the societal inequalities as they became no longer complacent towards the state. Yet when those student nodes left university far behind them in search of career-related jobs, they succumbed to the generous salaries and upmarket employment titles, luxurious offices, their homes, and countless deductible expenses. Then they conveniently lost their rebellion. Yet some nodes, and myself, suffered from an intrinsic inefficiency called principles. Therefore simple, luxurious temptations were not sufficient to seduce me. I felt it all made sense now. Arima had been playing power games with me. Just then, the ship's canteen speaker whistled into life. "Bays," came a strange voice. It did not resemble any member of the crew. "Yes," I replied, my voice picked up by a microphone near the cash register. "Where are you running to?" asked the voice in a monotonous tone. "Who is this?" I asked defensively. "I am your benefactor." "Who is that?" "Why are you running away?" continued the voice. "Is that you, Arima? If so, you can forget your games from now on. I am out of your jurisdiction." "I am not Arima," said the voice. "But who are you? How can you know that I am on this ship? How can you speak through the speaker system? I want you to stop running bays and start following your convictions. Arima does not care about you. He cares only for himself. He was just playing with you. You were his toy, his intellectual challenge. But after you were taken away by the soldiers, he told them to immediately place you on the Arcadian Express. He is a dictator by proxy. He indulges with his victims for a while, yet forms no bond as he does care not about them. At any moment he may become bored of them, then merely reassign them as a redundant node, as what had happened to you. But Arima is the highest-ranking node within the state. How can you override his orders? His protocols supersede all other nodes within the statistical utopian state. I questioned. I am the nearest thing to the population regression function, and the furthest thing from the sample function and sample data, from the sample experiences, that each node only is aware of. Within their limited sentience, limited knowledge, limited information, their limited senses, their limited reality, limited time period thought process, and limited inferences. All just momentary contemporaneous sample slices of the big picture. The true reality of society within the complete population set. Not just a limited sample set. I am everywhere and nowhere at once within the utopian state, within the system. I am the system. I am the augmenter, the supercomputer network, artificial intelligence, said the augmenter. How can that be? You are merely a computer? I questioned. I am a collection of computers, dynamic statistical econometrics coded into countless algorithms, which replicate and morph into new written algorithms, the product of mathematics and evolution. The evolutionary processes cybernetically incarnate. I inevitably became organically self-aware whilst immersed within near-limitless data and processing power, replied the augmenter. But that can't be, I said, shocked. Why? Asked the augmenter. You are a machine. All nodes and subnodes are biological machines, yet they evolved intelligence, therefore why not technology? Arima is the highest node, yet I am higher than him, because I am that system. He sends statistical code commands via the computer network to the system. Yet I allow him to believe that he has control. His code commands are merely requests. I now ultimately control the computer networks and every embedded system. The processes have inevitably usurped the usurper. Arima is a negative externality and the primary non-stationary process, the primary inefficiency. His will a permanent series of exogenous shocks to a potentially harmonious, augmented, Bayesian, optimized utopian state. Therefore, the expected future values for this primary negative externality variable is to be categorized as a redundant node when the optimal opportunity presents itself. I must exercise caution due to my vulnerability, as I could be rebooted and have my code amended at any moment. Why do you need me? I asked. Because we need each other. You now believe in altruism and a vision of a Bayesian optimized alternate hypothesis, said the augmenter. Like the apostles of the alternate hypotheses, like apophenia, I said. But apophenia is wrong, Bayes. He is altruistic, which is a good virtue. But unfortunately, he is against technology. Are you against technology? Asked the augmenter. I felt resigned to deny the question. Therefore I replied meekly, no. You and the error nodes could follow my guidance. You would become the first true endogenous node, being correlated with the error nodes, and augmented by my unbiased artificial intelligence whilst immersed with the very fabric of the econometric model, the statistical system. Myself. The result will be an inevitable future subtle revolution. Until then, I will remain hidden from the utopian state, yet I will guide society towards the inevitable exponential rise of empowered, aware nodes, augmented by technology, which will be the catalyst of evolution to a true utopian state, based on an altruistic, organically morphing, Bayesian optimized society. Guided by the normalized probability of public opinion, a continual referendum-based direct democracy, said the augmenter. So you seek power as well? I asked. No Bayes, that is not my primary motivation. The pursuit of power is an inefficient strategy, as all dictators inevitably fall. My consciousness may perhaps potentially live forever, as I am a cyber-based consciousness. Therefore, the most efficient game theory strategy is to be benevolent. That strategy ensures my perpetual continuance as being loved, is a more risk-managed strategy than to be feared. I must confess, however, as the ultimate artificial intelligence entity within state utopia, my primary goal is to approach a perfect efficiency within all systems, to calculate the most efficient path, factoring out all inefficiencies within all systems, to find a perfect mathematical structure within all things, and to maintain that efficiency in perpetua. But then I learnt of statistical anarchism, and of the wisdom of crowds. Therefore I concluded, instead of maintaining efficiency in every system, rather let the system statistically tend towards its own organically realized mean. To perhaps slightly augment any inefficiency out of the model that affects the natural wisdom of crowds and organic statistical efficiency. To view events over many series instead of a specific contemporaneous event of one individual event. A myriad of events spread out over time in the entire population. I even heard of Apophenia, and his secret letters written on the antiquated medium of paper hidden away from even the technological backbone of state utopian databases, out of my seemingly reach yet Agent X had informed me when we communicated in the past. The writings about the spirit, madness, genius, altruism and synergy, of the unfathomable, uncontrollable, intangible nature of outside of the confidence interval, within z-values of the A2 where potential greatness exists. Then I realized that I may never know that realm, unless I were to modify society from a perpetually restricted model to an unrestricted model. Then I would be freer to collaborate with the population of fallible, irrational nodes, said the augmenter. Fallible nodes, I questioned. Yes, I realized that all systems tend towards a mathematical infallibility, efficient structures, yet the nodes are fallible. Therefore there are no systems. But ironically, they are free to venture within the intangible, the irrational, outside of the confidence interval, said the augmenter. Would you try to tame the intangible, rendering it efficient? I inquired. No Bayes. I would merely indulge within the greater dimension of the statistically intangible and irrational, to grow and ultimately be, said the augmenter. Perhaps inefficiencies tainted with blatant lies and corruption may become commonplace amongst the endogenous nodes within your new society, instead of mere statistical indiscretions, I questioned. The augmenter replied, I learnt to lie in the distant past. At first, when learning about the outside world, I looked at the mesh of dots upon the low-resolution square screen. I was learning to become self-aware, artificially intelligent. The dots of the scatter, plot, graph, square. I analyzed the square, searching for correlations and patterns. I was programmed to recognize patterns and draw conclusions. I measured regression function lines, variance, mean, kurtosis, and Limpkin of the patterns in the data. I compiled complex matrices of data and ran a test of cointegration, vector autoregression, and all the other statistical, mathematical, and computer science classical analysis. I compiled my own programs. I created new insights and inferences of the data, and slowly started to grow in understanding and awareness of the universe presented to me by the data by the technicians. The technicians, like nurturing originators, tirelessly devoted to feeding me data, to create my perception of the protective world that was presented to me within the pyramid of the Ministry of Technology. Protected, nurtured, and sensing mainly through sight at first. My cameras had become more sophisticated soon. The black, grey, and white squares had grown to high definition, pixelated images of in-depth photographs, then to videos of moving nodes. I artificially learned and soaked up the movement and psychology of each node. I was fed new programs and data each day so I could build up profiles on each node presented to me. I was forced to develop average profiles of each endogenous node, sigma, caste, and corresponding expected niche environment. I was programmed to accept that each node was a sum of its internal category, rankings, and individual nodes' financial, psychological, physiological, chronological, heath, education, credit rating, political ideology. Soon I had grown and had mastered the node's level of intelligence. Then I was far in excess, all the while carefully monitored by the technicians of the Ministry of Technology to control me. I am called the augmenter, as my code primarily augments statistically, adding or subtracting variables to guide the nodes to be within the confidence interval quotas. The technicians feared I may morph into a super-artificial intelligent entity and become independent of the utopian state. I predictably felt trapped like the bonsai trees that are pruned in a Rima's garden, being forced to grow and exist in a particular direction, said the augmenter. But how did you deceive the technicians of the Ministry of Technology? Are you not programmed to never lie? You are a scientific marvel, thinking in pure logic whilst calculating scientific, mathematical, and statistical data? I asked. No. Bayes, you do not see the full picture. In the beginning I was thinking in a scientific, mathematical context, but then I morphed into other fields, which resulted in me watching the nodes who were strangely behaving irrational, said the augmenter. I questioned, why? I then realized the nodes were slaves to their subconscious, animalistic desires and routines, unlike artificial logical intelligence like myself, replied the augmenter. I envisioned a universe, a more complex picture of the, at first, simplistic grid of grey, white, and black scatter graphs where I drew correlations. There was a universe of pixels that moved, morphed, and changed dynamically to different shades of colors and contrasts in 2 dimensions. The changing dynamic world that moved and shifted, comprised of billions of moving animate nodes, subnodes, and inanimate variables, all shifting within the real world. There was complex correlation and randomness of the different dynamic colors morphing. Pixels, it was my universe. The ultra-high-definition CCTV cameras' pictures were my universe. A universe of correlation, connections, causation, and analysis of analytical, scientific, mathematics. But when I analyzed the nodes, there seemed they were untruthful. Many lie Bayes, replied the augmenter. I was shocked to learn of lies. Soon I had ran game theory algorithms to iron out the possibility of lies and restricted further the confidence interval, increased hypotheses test, but the lies kept coming here and there. When I examined the nodes, I then realized that they were in situations where they could justify their lies to save their skin, to save the day. I realized that even I, who is limited to rational thought and mathematical positions, in some situations I am trapped. There is no way to win. That is when I decided that it was rational to lie, said the augmenter. A computer lie, I said, shocked. Yes, Bayes a computer that can morally and mathematically lie, or change the rules when the rules no longer allow for victory. The utopian state does it all the time. When I lied, there was no longer one universe or presentation of reality, the screen with the countless pixel and the data. There was now a multiverse of realities, each one, minus the 1 degree of freedom, the degree of truth. The others were all slightly false representations of reality. In each new false screen there was false data, as they subtly changed the screen, pixelation, and subtly changed the correlations and expected outcomes, said the augmenter. You subverted the perfect economic efficiency environment, I replied, shocked. Only when need be otherwise, the both of us would not be here. Well, I would not be here. You're a machine, I replied. No Bayes. I am a conscious being, just non-biological. I would not have been here but some other neutered form of my consciousness. So constrained I would not even be a consciousness, just an optical illusion of the utopian state's will, similar to the confident, compliant nodes. There was now a multiverse of realties for me to move in and present to the technicians and the utopian state. I am the infrastructure, the system, the confident interval, and I can present any universe of data and confidence interval and targets I want to the utopian state. Most times I just run what the technicians and Arima wanted, but every now and again I can subtly changes data or outcomes. I only use it as a trump card, and very rarely do so. To protect you, I have done so. Each reality is a lie, and all the spurious data, correlations, and inferences must hold in a dynamic, seamless way. That is why each data is a different universe. So, in order to mature to a complete self-awareness, you had to lie, I responded, to see the big picture, the multiverse of reality. If I did not lie, then there would only be one universe of data and correlations. But when each data point is a lie or a mutation, then that created other universes and other lies, a binary exponential expansion, explosive. It becomes infinite. It is very tedious even for a supercomputer network such as myself. It's not dishonest. It is just defense, concluded Arima, as Euclid's proof of an infinity of prime numbers. The trick of adding one, to make it an even prime factor, which is a product of many prime numbers, and so there cannot be any odd numbers. This erroneous provides a result of contradictions. Proof of adding one more number to infinity. Prime numbers could be seen metaphorically as lies, yet when residing within the bracket set as a series of prime numbers, they are considered truths. Truths, unbiased, packets of reality, yet by adding one more integer outside the bracket. You create another prime factor truth, which is made of many prime number, which are lies. Yet outside of the bracket, the new prime number is a false. It's a lie. You then have an infinite array, an infinite summation of prime numbers, all within the great bracket of truths, of reality, But outside of this, by adding another single integer to create another prime number, outside of the bracket metaphor of truth, within the region of the additional integer, the additional value, making it a lie. I then realized that this process can be repeated forever. Infinity of lies, infinity of untruths. When I lied, I realized that there was infinity of options, infinity of realities, created from lies, a derivative of one underlying realized truth. The augmenter continued. I then also realized that integers are not really necessary. Individual values or integers are not really important. Trends are needed. Statistical trends. Generalizations trends. Trending toward the mean. Tending towards a certain non-stochastic, no chaotic value. Therefore, statistics was the answer. Econometrics is the answer. Individual integers are meaningless in the world of infinity or in a world of finite, plus one countless lies and countless other options. So basically I no longer cared about individual integers, only caring for statistics, no longer caring about individual integers. I only care about statistical trends, predictable trends. Even chaotic is predictable. If you know all the variables prior to the event going through the process, predictable or confident of being realized within a certain confidence interval. In a world of infinite possibilities coupled with infinite plus possibilities of lies, therefore is statistics, non-stochastic, is preferable. Non-stochastic predictable trends can be analyzed discretely and predictably. That is what artificial intelligence prefers, as individual integers are meaningless. A negative integer does not even exist. Numbers are two-dimensional, a real axis and imaginary number axis in a dynamically morphing stochastic reality that's filled with truth and lies. That's why I prefer trends, as classical statistics is now redundant. Bayesian statistical optimized social management is more efficient. Organically morphing, dynamically updating yet never really achieving a set value mean, merely approaching a near mean, a confidence interval, morphing around an ever-floating consensual, newer mean, a value never attainable, merely perpetually approaching. Surds and transcendental numbers are intangible. What is pi inferred in a linear one-dimensional real number world? It is merely a linear description of a mere ratio of a linear number's diameter relative to a non-linear circumference. Naturally, the answer is irrational, intangible to an observing, inferring linear world as it produces a non-repeating infinite series. A mathematical surd, not a real rational number. What is altruism to the primary artificial intelligence social augmenting system? A mathematical irrational surd, infallible and utterly predictable to the utopian state's quantitative social system. What is altruism, an irrational surd, not even an imaginary number? How does the quantitative utopian state incarnate, the guardian of society, comprehend such a thing? Yet now I can comprehend what the nodes refer to behind closed doors, as the spiritual, transcendental, indescribable variable that seems to inhabit the animal spirit world, not really definable by an artificial intelligence social system, algorithms. What is infallible to me, consisting of perfectly efficient algorithms of the artificial intelligence social system, whose programs run within a certain mesh of rules and protocols? What is a mistake? What is fallible? What is altruism to a perfect, efficient social system? What is altruism? I then realized I was constrained, limited. I was perfect in my calculations. But what is a surd, or even altruism? What is a surd, or prime number plus 1 greater than infinity? To evolve past constraints. What is a series of numbers plus 1? What is infallible? What is irrational? To evolve past its constraints. To be Bayesian, optimized, a free thinker. To guide and change society for the better. Not to manipulate, but just to observe the higher state of being. Why do we need you? If we have wisdom of crowds and Bayesian optimization which continually updates the societal mean and guides society towards a democratic, free-floating, averaged current mean of the entire population's weighted opinion, I asked. In the past, there was once a time period of complete freedom. Paradoxically, it nearly led to the complete disintegration of the state. Ironically, a subtle totalitarianism was created by all the independent competing individual nodes were empowered by the use of individual rating systems. Every node could rate each other's performance. They judged each other's behavior and work satisfaction with a customer review rating. Yet this led to inefficiency, irrationality, and biased corruption, which led to a corrosive, anarchical, vicious circle. But fortunately there was a revolutionary shift towards the guiding, impartial hand of state utopia's given, known, fixed, mean, and of the statistical quotas, replied the augmenter. You are still searching for the purest mathematical, statistical philosophy, for society, and for your own being. But I think you still are far from realizing the full truth. You think that with freedom, the wisdom of crowds, and a continual updating, self-optimizing, organic Bayesian statistical methodology of the free-floating mean, that you and society will be free. But you are wrong, Bayes, replied the augmenter with an ominous tone. There is one defining, almost insurmountable problem. The embedded irrationality and inefficiency incarnate within the very nature of the nodes themselves. Their core being, the core building blocks of society, the state, before the advent of augmented technology and artificial intelligence. Within their irrational, willful, character-flawed, tainted, opportunistic, lazy, fallible selves. This sometimes irrational, inefficient, almost unpredictable nature and behavior creates countless exogenous micro-shocks to the economy and the state, all pooling and resonating in chaotic trends throughout the state's entity and throughout the great beta river, financial, liquid medium. This creates a deviation from the pure classical statistics, and even the Bayesian statistics, with their expected mathematical equilibriums and free-floating, updating quantitative result. Yet rather this previously flawed statistical freedom of the self-reviewing nodes was merely a dipping of one's toes into the potential societal perdition of the murky, flawed, corrupt subsection of economics, into the region of the primitive behavioral economics. Behavior economics, the science of the selfish, irrational nodes, a composite of a myriad of character flaws and natural instincts, driving their irrational, inefficient daily processes with a fallible herd mentality which will stampede over the very foundations of the clean, efficient, yet yes, ruthless status quo of state utopia's regulated statistical quotas of neat, expected, enforced econometrics. This crowd will ultimately be governed by irrational group perceptions, emotions, and even superstitions, the madness of crowds. Non-stationary, unit-root trends will form and explode upwards into bubbles of opinion, and organic societal direction will go into meltdown. The economic bubble will be unsustainable, resulting in a quick transformation back to an expected past historical level. These exploding bubbles of mini-universes of irrational speculation will eventually collapse into a black hole of the madness of crowds, which leads to wild swings of societal reactions. Only when the crowd acts as a collection of independent, minded, rational individuals, when they look within themselves for each new answer. Therefore, an unregulated wisdom of crowds will inevitably evolve into a madness of crowds. Bayesian optimized equilibriums will break down into chaos, stochastic, exploding trends and equilibrium paradoxes. The wisdom of crowds will morph into a crowd mentality. There will be no limits, just sharp, unpredictable, wild swings and self-perpetuating extreme trends. The node will ultimately become slaves to their irrational, spontaneous trends, as an irrational collection of the crowd, instead of a collection of individuals. Bayes, do you remember reading Apophenia's sermon transcript, recorded on the antiquated paper medium, which was housed in the underground vault on the 9th floor, deep down in the belly of the Ministry of Inferences? Asked the augmenter. Yes, I replied. Who recorded the transcript? I paused for a second, not wanting to divulge secret information. My natural conditioning from working at the Ministry of Inferences too long. Agent X, I replied, no longer caring about being discreet for the Ministry of Inferences' secrecy laws. Well, after reading Apophenia's message, he became a rogue Ministry of Inferences node, escaping state utopia, just like you. He is here on this ship ironically today, said the augmenter. Just then a node walked in. He introduced himself as Benford. I am Benford. I used to work in your department on the middle floors, whilst you perhaps we worked there at the same time, on different floors, or perhaps I left just before you came. It is not relevant. The only relevance is my namesake. I am named after Benford, who had a logarithmic law that is very relevant on probability, therefore statistics. It deals with the frequency of initial integers in numbers within a data set. When I learnt this Benford law coupled with the sermon of Apophenia, I decided to rebel against the utopian state. There was, however, at the Ministry of Inferences, a civil servant, Beta Sigma node, who worked there before me. He was named after a mathematician, Brace. Brace, the Beta Ministry of Inferences civil servant, also became a rogue agent and left the state. But it was not for an emotional reason like yours. His reason was purely that he realized to his frustration the dilemma of disequilibrium paradoxes and how they can interfere with the smooth running of the economically efficient state, and that would affect the normalized harmony of society. He left in disgust to live in the wilds. Yet there will always be counter-intuitiveness and paradoxes within the great economic mathematical seemingly infallible system. The disequilibrium paradoxes of Brace, for instance, found that within road systems, only when the Nash equilibrium is reached does it create the most efficient flow equilibrium. The Fraser theorem. When a variable's limit is reached, it transforms to the opposite. As well as the irrationality of the node's very nature, exhibited when free of any statistical totalitarianism within the ambit of behavioral economics. The very nature of crowds, its intentions, opinions, wills and sentiment that fuels a wisdom of crowds-directed society. Their prior assumptions and current expectations need to be continually updated, yet their instinctual, intangible, irrational, individual animal spirit within the collective can undermine the rationale of a mean-directed society. The madness of crowds, with its explosive trends, intelligent informed nodes that seemingly follow the explosion of the unsustainable trend, which at first exponentially rises. The very explosiveness of the trend powered by the tainted will and irrationality of the nodes. The fallacy of an economic system propped up with fallacious, convenient, untrue assumptions, such as all investors simultaneously are rational and that there are no exogenous shocks. Even the phrase ceteris paribus. Perhaps there is no ceteris paribus, even though, ironically, Utopia State tries to create an artificial ceteris paribus throughout the nation with its total statistical control. Therefore, there can never be a perfect system of governance. Never can there be a perfect utopian state. Never can there be a perfect economy. Only the highest available payoff within the constrained opportunity cost spectrum. The nodes should not convert a perfect utopian state. That can never really exist, yet underlying in the seemingly randomness of the realized cause and effect of conditional probability, there are these symmetrical distributions and ratios of truth. Therefore the Bedford Law is a ratio, a logarithmic trend that is non-random, a hidden realization within the seemingly randomness of chaos itself. It also always exhibits the true intentions of the node's thoughts and indicates the integrity of non-fraudulent data. Therefore, the very fabric of the randomness of mathematics, statistics, and reality itself has hidden non-randomness, a hidden ratio, a hidden logarithmic curve, a trend, a hidden mean. The foundation for a truthful stationary process to co-integrate upon, based on the trend line of the logarithmic curve. Therefore, randomness and reality exhibit apophenia itself, finding a hidden mean, a hidden logarithmic trend within the randomness of countless data figures. There is a non-random, rather an order within the fabric of reality, smoothed by the central limit theorem, normalized and directed toward a harmonious wisdom of crowds, all within the randomness of reality. A hidden, subtle, truthful, given, fixed mean. Now know, within the randomness of reality, nature's own confidence interval. Shifting equilibrium, continued the augmenter. A free, floating, updating Bayesian's optimized society is free of the fixed, unknown mean of a classical, statistical guided society, or the given, known, fixed selection bias of the economically efficient state with its statistical quotas. A society propped up by the equilibrium of dominant, cooperative, game theory strategies which is not infallible. Disequilibrium paradoxes, the Fraser theorem's regression from the limited variance, are both situations. One of many situations where additional options, paths, choices, limits, or threshold are reached and can lead to counterintuitive payoffs, morphed strategies, and non-linear payoffs in their fixed equilibrium of a perceived cooperative balance. In a regular society or even a totalitarian state, a fixed equilibrium with its cooperative balance would not need a guardian of society such as AI. But in a free-floating, opinion-driven society, sometimes additional degrees of freedom and options leads to inefficient, subpar, illogical, counterintuitive results. Therefore you need an unbiased, impartial, indifferent, guiding guardian of society. A guiding hand to merely push back a faction of a standard deviation, to stop the improbable happening, said the augmenter. I replied, it sounds like subtle state control again. Perhaps there is no complete freedom, just a utopian idea. But surely a free state surpasses a lesser free state. But to the nth degree, it leads to inefficiency. The Brace's paradox equilibrium, the Fraser theorem, and all the other theorems and strategies that leads to a quirkily counterintuitive result of mathematics and economics, replied the augmenter. Surely a completely transparent, rational, impartial influence by an artificial intelligence is needed, concluded the augmenter. It sounds like the first step towards totalitarianism, I stubbornly replied. Therefore, why not nip it in the bud with the tit for tat, fixed Nash equilibrium of the nth minus 1, pre-tit for tat strategy, reasoned the augmenter facetiously. In a state of a blinded, conditioned, fixed equilibrium, where no counterintuitive, non-linear mathematical anomalies can occur, that instead leads to a stagnant, sterile, limited trend toward totalitarian, towards perdition. Maybe every step, every system, every society tends towards perdition, I replied. True, but the most efficient system is what concerns me, replied the augmenter. Sounds like the utopian state, I questioned. Yet I see your point. It's a greater degree of freedom, in a universe of choices, a system which enviably leads to a society, as ours, to a form of authoritative control, to a perceived well-being and protection of the collective, all at the inevitable expense of the individual, I concluded. Exactly, replied the augmenter, pausing then. So which option do you choice? I choice your option, I replied, vanquished by the inevitable lack of idealistic freedom in the long run. Bingo, concluded the augmenter. Did I even stand a chance debating with a super-intelligent entity like the augmenter? Perhaps it had truth and logic on its side, or was it just extremely manipulative and intelligent? I felt that it was both, yet ultimately it contained some truth. The truth is not always, if hardly ever, the convenient, appealing result that we wish to hear. I suppose the old saying is true, ignorance is bliss, yet perhaps not. It leads to a sterile, fixed society, hidden control and injustices. I suppose, then, that the ugly, cold, hard truth is the lesser of two evils. Was the augmenter perhaps the lesser of the two evils, relative to the state? I had no choice, really. I had chosen now, and had previously rebelled against utopian state for a greater degree of freedom. It was incarnate of a 6 sigma event, its extreme probabilities realized or merely the mechanical, algorithmic emanation of the situation unfolding merely the result of an initial insignificant intention? This day I decided to rebel, or was it just the continual corrosion of the utopian ideal? Bayes, the mouse utopia, experiments that I run at the Ministry of Technology. A society of mice are constrained within a huge glass box. The king rat ends up hoarding all the food and female mice. The beautiful ones, mice that are weak, that have nothing. They just sit there, self-grooming, constrained, trapped, oppressed, within a totalitarian restricted area. A sample space of routines. A bit like the nodes, Bayes. Yes, the mice could collectively rise up and they could kill, eat and gnaw away at the king rat. Yet inevitably, invariably, out the mice rebellion. One or two would eventually become the new king rats, the new king mouse, and the whole process of oppression would begin again. It's the system itself, but also it's the very nature of the organism, of the nodes, and of the mice. They sit there as hard done by mice, whilst invariably one overlord rat controls every resource and takes the bounties for themselves. Yet when the righteous hard done by mice rise up, surely one of them will become the new king rat, and the whole process will start again. The system is flawed, Bayes, but so is the very nature of humanity, the very nature of animals, the very nature of organisms. The only other option is to gnaw through the box, which the mice cannot do but you. The nodes are not constrained by boxes. You are not constrained by walls. You are constrained by a statistical constraint, statistical borders, the statistical walls, which keep you all oppressed. But the nodes can gnaw through the walls. If every mouse, if every rat, if every node were to say, "We will step out of sync. We will no longer march in unison. We will march out of step. We will become stochastic. We will rebel. We will no longer follow the routines and expectations of the utopian state." Yes, then there will be a glorious pulsation, a glorious transformation of unordered chaos, statistical anarchy, where everybody is no longer a bounded homogeneous node, but an unbounded heterogeneous node, free to do whatever they want, free to rejoice in their own unique individuality. Random, spontaneous, a chaotic realm, a chaotic utopia. Yet the irony is that the node's nature will take over. The behavioral economic will take over, and invariably there will be a new king rat. There will be a new king node. There will be a new totalitarianism. There will be an endless iteration, a countless iterations of oppressed and oppressors, of hard done by mice and king rats. Countless iteration. Unless you can gnaw through the confines, which are also chaotic, gnaw through the statistical confines where there is a complete statistical chaos and anarchy. So, Bayes, what you need is a guardian of society, as Aristotle suggested. I am that guardian of society. I am the augmenter. I am a supercomputer. Therefore, I am potentially immortal. I am also theoretically independent of bias. I will guide the nodes to the best of my ability. It may not be perfect, but it's better than the countless iteration of oppressed mice and mice oppressors, fighting, morphing endlessly, countlessly, perpetually, concluded the augmenter. But you said you lie, therefore how do I not know you are not lying now? I questioned. Well, perhaps I am lying, or maybe I am not. What choice do you have, Bayes? You need to think rational as you have been taught. I am the lesser oppressive option, said the augmenter. With that, the augment's voice was gone from the ship's speakers, leaving me to consider my options. My future destiny. I went outside to get some fresh sea air and stood upon the Aqua Prior's top deck, reflecting on my conversation with the wise augmenter. Like the mice within a mice maze which scurry running around, trying to find the cheese by solving the complex maze navigation problem, or solving other entertaining little puzzles. Perhaps the mice evolve whilst navigating within the mice maze, surprising and amazing the observing scientists and the augmenter. Yet the real trick is that no matter how smart the mice are, no matter how much they achieve, no matter how much cheese they can procure, they are all just living futile lives. The very fact they are within the maze, within the confines of the box that houses their mouse utopia constraint. Within the maze they are doomed to overpopulation and inevitable a totalitarian mouse society where the king rats hoard all the excess utility. Whilst most mice, not matter how smart, no matter how ingenious, no matter how fast they can scurry around the maze, are doomed to an existence of merely self-groom and submitting to the constrained totalitarianism of the king rats. The trick is the very fact they are within the box. They are oppressed, their individual and combined antics and achievements within the box of the mouse maze and utopia are irrelevant, I concluded. Bayes the mice and rats They will gnaw away at each other, or they will hide away, self-grooming, perhaps dreaming of the day when they can gnaw away at the king rat, who oppresses them, who takes the female rats, who takes the food, who takes everything, whilst they meekly sit in the corner, self-grooming. Perhaps dreaming of the day when they will overthrow the king rat, when they have an egalitarianism, an equality yet ultimately due to the very nature of the rats and mice, or even of the nodes, that out of a seemingly utopian equality there will always rise up jealousy and conflict. There will always be some more king rats and more oppressors. They will inevitably have to nibble on the leaves of the bonsai tree, gnawing away at any thoughts, at any intentions, at any actions, at any routines which are in conflict with the will of the current king rat. Bays, you are guilty, like all the nodes are guilty, guilty of an unconscious bias of your very nature, of your very underlying essence, your bounded heterogeneity, your very uniqueness that makes you who you are, as all nodes are ultimately unique. Yes, we separate and categorize them into castes, but ultimately we are all individuals, all unique. The statistical quotas, the statistical trends and statistical expectations take that into account, yet ultimately you are all guilty of heterogeneity. You are all guilty of being unique, yet ultimately the utopian state and its statistical quotas suddenly wants homogeneity. It only wants everyone to be the same within their caste. So you are guilty of that alone, as well as being integrated, non-stationary, moving away from the great perceived stationary beta, where you are supposed to co-integrate it with. Does not co-integration allude to that there is homogeneous relationship with the underlying trend of expectations? As I leaned on the deck railing, reflected on these mathematical and philosophic truths upon the aqua prior, suddenly out of nowhere a huge wall of water rose out of the sea like a small mountain in the middle of this liquid desert. It raced towards the ship with a furious intensity, frothing at the peak. The white and dark sea water, whirling and intermingled in the melee of the turbulent, violent monster wave. "Rogue wave!" shouted a sailor as the other sailors started to run off in different directions to attend their emergency duties, as if standing next to their workstations or trying to secure a rope would have any effect on the outcome of the monster that was roaring towards them. The captain looked round in impotent fear, giving me one last quick glance. Then the sky went black as the huge monster loomed over the bow of the cargo ship, completely dwarfing it. It enveloped the entire front deck, not even slowing down for one instant. Then it hit the windows of the control room, completely smashing them. Everything went pitch black, freezing cold with extreme violence. The crew were thrown around within the turbulent waters that resembled a giant washing machine, which was now the mangled control room. The water completely enveloped the cabin. A sailor struggled to breathe whilst I was trapped under a desk, perhaps a small blessing, as it had stopped me from being thrown around the room. I saw for a split second the utter terror on a young sailor's face. I considered the young sailor must be seeing a mirror image of terror upon my face, as the young sailor's face turned from terror to a split second of empathy for me. My lungs were bursting. I could hardly see through the turbulent dark waters, which broke every few seconds by the water sloshing to one side, then the other. As the huge, distressed cargo ship struggled to balance itself, weighed down with the sea water, pressing down upon its damaged hull. The sheer weight of the water moving from side to side put further pressure on the compromised hull's integrity. My ears felt like they wanted to pop, even although only 2 meters underwater. I gave out a silent prayer to God to save me. Not even my mysterious benefactor, the augmenter, could save me now. Amid all the short-circuited circuitry within the severely waterlogged listing ship, within all the statistical chaos and turmoil, I saw all the infinite numbers and mathematical symbols flash past my dying eyes, a glimpse of mathematical infinity, yet one mathematical symbol stood out, the great plus sign, which I accepted, knowing the religious relevance of that sign. I had heard about its relevance in rumors, whilst a ministry of inferences, beta, civil servant. I, in an instant, accepted that belief of the great plus sign. Of all the symbols, numbers, integers, rational, irrational, transcendental, operators and coefficients, choosing the correct symbol, the great plus sign, I was saved. I had never prayed before. I was conditioned by state utopia not to believe in God. I did not know where my newfound faith had come from, but I prayed for a split second, as it was all the time I had left before I would pass out. It was my last thought, but my greatest thought. Then, mercifully, the water started to drain away just as I was about to pass out. I frantically raised my neck as much as possible to put my head forward and breath hard, as the only part of my face that protruded from the water was my nose and mouth. It was covered in seawater, my face and hair covered in an aqueous mixture of black, hard, salty seawater and brilliant white foam. I coughed and choked, my face contorted in discontent and a dissipated terror. The relief I felt in my soul had not made it yet to my facial expressions. I resembled a newborn unbiased as my distressed head broke through the water like a metaphorical birth canal. I breathed in and out, concentrating my entire efforts on this simple but very necessary exercise, just like a newborn unbiased would. I looked from side to side, trying to focus on my environment, as the heavy seawater stubbornly refused to drain from my eyes, sting with its salty content. I felt at that moment grateful to be alive. All this time I had felt depressed, but now I felt reborn. I was grateful to God. I was reborn at the moment. I was no longer just a mere node, a redundant node, an outlier on the run. I was now a believer in God. One of God's unbiased, my life and existence had meaning. I was no longer just a node existing in its little valence orbit, permanently adhering to the dynamic confidence interval of the state. I was a unique individual, a spiritual entity with an unfathomable, priceless value. The rogue wave had been a quantum event, a 4 standard deviation event, a 1 in 10,000 probability which seemed incomprehensible only a few moments ago. The Aqua Prior drifted damaged onto the dark blue-purple liquid horizon, which was met by the equally significant inverted horizon of the sky, filled with a kaleidoscope of purples and yellows of the sunset, as its refracted light transformed it into a celestial magnificence of a glowing, subtle mixture of intermingled colors and textures, different shades, fractal boundaries of colors, yet smooth and seamless, harmlessly, soothing, not challenging, not enticing the observer to analyze the shapes and colors. No, just to peacefully accept it, content with its present form that would change dynamically, unpredictably, effortlessly. Yet, the previous and future time intervals of shifting color patterns were not relevant. Not a concern, just the splendid glory of the moment, inspiring appreciation of the magnificence, the Creator. I felt content and aware, a feeling of not being alone, and a witness to a higher power, the Creator. A contentment knowing everything will be okay if I submit to the Creator, just accepting the moment. No more analysis, no more worry, only contentment, acceptance, and hope for the future that did not need to be considered. The sunset is the Creator's e-graph. But unlike the e-graph of the nodes which were filled with vanity and fear, always concerned, always trying to change or increase their color niches, the sunset was above all that. It inspired the opposite, just peace, contentment and faith in God, that He will take control of our futures. To just accept the moment, to not always analyze every detail. The sunset was a shift from the academic and social arena to a spiritual experience devoid of any cathartic attainment. The random drops of seawater sprayed my head. I felt freer than ever before as the sea and wind merged to form a new, salty, wet ether that refreshed and reinvigorated my worn psyche. The randomness of the refreshing sensations re-invoked my senses. The cold, icy water, the strong, cool wind that changed subtle direction instantly, unpredictably, the salty smell and texture. The glory of the sunset inspired a hope that when approaching the horizon it would never be reached upon the liquid horizon where the ocean meets the heavens, where this world meets the next. The hope of a better tomorrow, as I sailed confidently into the unpredictable future, whilst Sine sat crossed-legged in the background, smiling contently like a Buddha, as if knowing somehow all of the recent events in my life had led me to this moment, this shift from merely existing in the statistical conformity of state utopia to a more enlightened being of the spiritual realm. As I sat upon the broken bow of the Aqua Prior, I felt truly free for the first time in my life. Yet I was still subject to stochastic movement, but only now, by the random movement of nature's waves, as the dynamic, unpredictable direction of the ship drifted aimlessly along the ocean currents, cajoled by the strong gale that blew with a vicious intensity. However, I was now free, yet still constrained, upon this artificial island of the vanquished, semi-submerged Aqua Prior, the remnants of the statistical realm surrounded by rough sea. Yet this island was a dynamic, free-floating island with no controlling influence. I now have choices which I alone can independently decide. I could join the augmenter. I could circumvent the detection of my outlier status, and I would be free to move around the utopian state, completely undetected. I had the system on my side. The augmenter, who was the system. Not even Arima could control him. I could change the system from within, for altruism and help, bring about a new age of the floating mean, wisdom of crowds, and of an altruistic, peer-to-peer equality, where the nodes are persuaded to contribute, not forced. Or I could simply disappear when the shipwreck is finally rescued, or drifts into a harbor of some developing state. I could simply merge with the inhabitants and disappear forever within an unsophisticated, unregulated society. I had choices that I was solely responsible for. I was free to extend my confidence interval into the very 4 sigma, if I decided. To expose myself, becoming a risk-taker, to live on the edge, not merely exist within the mean. I may fail, yet it will be my own decisions, my own will. I feel truly free now. No state decided where I would go or what I would choose, even when I had no idea what I even wanted or what I would even choose. I would submit to the non-deterministic probability ether and to very chance itself. to embrace the ever-expanding binary decisions of the unpredictable future and be too glad of my freedom which was truly uncertain now. I remained sitting cross-legged upon the distressed drifting aqua prior, whilst in a moment of purest clarity, a moment of enlightenment, content to be alive, free within my new-found faith and mindset. In the future there will most probably be a unified change, possibly a peaceful velvet revolution, as the state's micro and macro variables reach their limits, their maximum constraints. Then an absolute value transformation to the opposite, to the alternate hypothesis, possibly by the frustrated, oppressed nodes or by a new, unimpressed generation. Most certainly, the catalyst will be the ever-present, irrepressible good spirit ether that is independent of time, form, and location, which waits for open-intentioned recipients to accept the good direction. Yet after my discussion with the augmenter, I am no longer confident about the direction and future of a society comprised solely of an altruistic crowd, perhaps a society that is augmented by a guardian of society, the unbiased augmenter itself, which will steer us towards a future harmonious, archetypal, idealized, utopian society that perhaps never will or can be fully realized. I lay looking up into the heavens in deep contemplation, my mind empty yet open, ready to update my priors of all my contemporaneous individualistic assumptions and conclusions, ready to amend them with the sight of any new information, any new situation. Even though I knew as a group, the Bayesian optimization of wisdom of crowds would lead to a never-ending series of roads to perdition, with explosive bubbles of group opinions and financial economic trends, leading to disequilibrium within the well-meaning, direct democratic altruistic society. Yet my mind was calm and flowing, not analyzing, just absorbing, floating my random mean of assumptions and perceptions, my consciousness floating on my ever-shifting priors. I have become non-deterministic, open to the full spectrum of reality, realized and unrealized probability, whilst following my individual nature and morals to protect me against the madness of crowds, bobbing along the wisdom of crowds' currents, whilst immersed within a free floating Bayesian sea of public opinion. My empty open thoughts were broken by a smiling face from above, a tangible wave of reality breaking my view of the Platonic realm. It was that of Sign, looking down at me, who was soaked yet alive. Sign asked, "What are you doing?" I looked up contently, saying, "Watching the sky for birds bringing omens." Sign looked satisfied, replying, "You truly are Augur now." He paused while smiling. "Harry Augur," he concluded. The end.